Hi, welcome everyone, and Salam Ramadan to all of you. Right now is the big point of the Ramadan month, so thank you for taking your time to come to the Indian Heritage Center. You must be wondering why we are in the Indian Heritage Center instead of the Malay Heritage Center. The reason is because the Malay Heritage Center is currently having a revamp and closed for renovation works. And we are happy that the Indian Heritage Center has kindly given us the space to run a 2 days program. Okay, let me introduce myself. My name is Rashikin Raja. I am your moderator for today. And for everyone's information, today's session will be recorded, and this will be recorded on the MHC's YouTube page. So before we start, allow me to introduce our topic and our speakers. Today's session is discuss the evolving gender roles for Malay women. The role of Malay women in our community has long been shaped by traditions, but over time we have seen inspiring shifts. Today's Malay women are leading, innovating, and redefining their spaces for both professional and cultural spheres. They are not just participants in the institutions, they are also decision makers, change agents, and storytellers shaping the future of our community. So with us here today, we have two speakers, Ms. Noor Haira Abdul Rahim and Ms. Shaza Isham, who will be sharing on their respective presentations. So without further ado, let us invite our first speaker, Ms. Haira, who is the Vice President too of PTIS, Singapore Muslim Women's Association, for her sharing. But before she takes on the podium, you sit here, this is fine. We will do a little introduction of who Ms. Noor Haira is. Ms. Noor Haira Abdul Rahim is a marketing leader with over 14 years of experience in marketing, sales, and business strategy, spanning MNCs and tech startups. She has successfully led regional marketing and sales teams, driving business growth and strategic brand positioning. She currently serves as the Vice President too of the PPIS Board of Governance, championing women's development and family support initiatives. Her presentation is titled Sama Tapi Tak Serupa.
Serupa tidak
Serupa
sama.
tapi tak sama. So put your hands together for which
Thank you, Rashidin. Selamat petang dan salam hormat kepada semua. Yeah. A very good afternoon to all you esteemed guests. It is my privilege and honor to be here representing PPIS, which is the equivalent of the Singapore Muslim Women's Association, a very active charity that supports more than 30,000 women and families in Singapore. So this topic is, one that is very close to my heart. The evolution of gender roles is obviously something that personally affects me and the women in my life, right? Which is why I've entitled this presentation Serupa Tidak Sama, really because we are so diverse, not just my grandmother or mothers of different generations, but even the peers in our own generation. So today I would like to touch a little bit upon the key demographic trends, the social trends that affect us, and also how the confluence of traditions, values, and importantly, intersectionality of microcultures that we subscribe to will play out in the roles and our responsibilities that we shoulder, and of course has a bearing on the aspirations that we have. Okay, so these photos that you see on the screen, in my opinion, are symbolic of some of the ways and that the lived realities for Malay professional women have evolved. So on the left is a photo of a Malay family from the 1950s to 70s. It shows a typically larger family with 6 children. The father figure is looming at the back, right? Symbolic perhaps of the sense of duty, the responsibility of providing as the sole breadwinner in most cases, while the children are pretty much very close to the mother, right, up front. Again, symbolic of a Malay women's primary role back then, which is caregiving, managing a household, raising children, and contributing to the community. Marriage for Malay women was typically in the late teens, even early 20s. Family sizes of 5 or more children was very common back then. So in contrast, if you look at the photo on your right, again, perhaps symbolic of a more typical average Malay family today, right? The size of the family is considerably smaller, right? I think TFR is now slightly above 1, if not almost less than 1. I think 0.9 for national average, if I'm not wrong. And Malay women too, like other Singapore women, are facing the trend of delaying marriage, and perhaps that distance between the children and the father, I think, also is symbolic of the increasingly more equitable distribution of roles within the family's context. At the same time, there's also an increasing trend of more Malay women remaining single, right? So this trend has grown from 12.5% in 2010 to 17.2%, closer to 2 in 10 women, actually, right? Again, reflecting a change in social norms, expectations, and aspirations. On the education front, among Malay residents aged 25 to 34, 8 in 10 women now have post-secondary or higher qualifications, compared to 6 in 10 just 10 years ago in 2010. And the number of women with university degrees has also doubled, 2 in 10 in 2020 compared to 1 in 10 in 2010. So this progress is significant. And of course, the rise in educational qualifications does correspond with labor force participation too, with overall female labor force participation rate increasing quite dramatically, more than 4 times or close to more than 4 times, from 12.6% in 1960 to 47.6%. I don't want to bore you with the stats, but I think this is important to lay the context before we have our conversation. And of course, women in the past, it's not that women were not working, to be very honest, right? It's just that those who did take up official formal employment did so more because they wanted to provide for the livelihood of the family. So it was more out of need and necessity, as opposed to today where more women are doing it really out of choice and aspiration. So in the Aspirations of Women research done by PPIS in 2020, we found that 7 out of 10 women said they wanted to work even if there is no financial reason to do so, right? So yeah, this graph that you see here is really just the trend for specifically Malay women, whereas the previous one was just national average. So for Malay women specifically, 53.4% of Malay women aged 15 and above are economically active, meaning they are actively looking for employment or already in employment, right? And this is, again, quite a big growth, generally speaking. So, of course, how does this affect the roles, the aspirations of Malay women? You know, again, I would like to highlight, some of the key findings of our Aspirations of Muslim Women research. Of course, bearing in mind that majority of Malays, I would dare say close above 90% of Malay women are Muslims, and vice versa, right? There's a close correlation there. Number one of the key aspirations is achieving work-life balance, succeeding in both the career and home front, to be a more practicing Muslim, to attain financial independence, and achieve her own personal health and well-being aspirations. In fact, what was quite interesting is the research unveiled 4 key archetypes. So there was the traditional conformist, typically associated with those above 50s, the balanced striver, who is trying to balance really on all fronts, to the extent of even becoming a super mom of sorts, the driven achiever, who prioritizes career, and then the purpose seeker, who is really trying to recalibrate a purpose-filled life and questioning almost every decision that she makes so that she curates a lot more in that sense. So whilst the priorities and challenges faced for each archetype obviously differs, there is still this common theme of wanting to balance multiple roles, and doing each role well, right? But I think therein lies a paradox of sorts, because here we're saying, okay, today women have more choices. There's more autonomy. There's more ambition to some extent. But there is this need to navigate not just the intersection of faith, culture, and career aspirations, but there's now a greater pressure to not just do more, but to do better, if I may, in each role, right? And then coupled with the age of hyper-awareness, we are all in an always-on culture, A lot of us ascribe to this, we're inundated with information. Today, there's a school of thought with baby-led weaning, for example. I have a young, 10-month-old baby, right? My algorithm is constantly feeding me with new videos of what I should be feeding my kids, sometimes questioning the one I saw yesterday, right? So this is the reality that we're living in today. And this inadvertently, obviously, will lead to the need to balance that mental load, right? What information do I ascribe to as an individual versus how do I grapple with my tradition, my faith, and my personal goals? So it is, and this does have a huge bearing, especially on women who oftentimes are the default mental load manager of the family. This is just a glimpse, right, of how that looks like in terms of the mental load. These are the questions I ask myself on any regular day, to be honest, right? From family to career to personal development, there's always something that I'm thinking about. There's always something that I am unsure of and something that I want to do more of, right? And also there's this interesting notion, I'm sure all of us have heard of this, the perempuan Melayu terakhir, I wouldn't say this is something we actively talk about, but I would say it is something we've all internalized, no matter how modern you are, okay? And if you serve in the community, like I do, it is quite apparent. There's this unspoken rule of how the Malay women has to be modern, but cannot be too loud. You have to be assertive, wise, you must be a pinnacle of virtuous, moral wisdom, calm, but ever so beautiful, gracious, never angry, almost unrealistic, to be honest, right? There's so much pressure. And women, I think, also, to some extent, Malay women, we have internalized this, right? So there's this tension as well. On one hand, I've been fed, for example, the Western notion of what success and leadership looks like. That looks like the assertive woman who isn't afraid to call out, biases, who is loud when it's needed. But on the other hand, internally, I genuinely have internalized this concept of the perempuan Melayu terakhir, right? So there is that tension as well. This is again an example of the microcultures that we are all subscribing to, right? I'm not just, for example, Malay, a leader, a professional woman, I'm also someone who believes in baby-led weaning, right? I'm someone who believes perhaps in exploring homeschooling. I'm someone who explores using my Thermomix so that I can be that wonderful mother who feeds my kid nutritious food, life hacks, right? But I also look up to people like Nilofa, who seems to have it all. She's this perfect, curated, beautiful woman who's modest and who has the kids who look so good. Her husband is also handsome and religious. I mean, yeah, not realistic, right? But these are the standards that unfortunately we are being fed and we subscribe to ourselves, But having said that, these are some wonderful, influential women, and influential and remarkable in their own right. For example, Shami, she is a modern Malay cuisine advocate, right? She celebrates, Malay food culture when it has, in some ways, been criticized for being unhealthy, for example. She's helping us, in some ways, look at that again and redefine what that means for us as modern Malay women. Ustazah Shamim is a spiritual guide to many Malay Muslim women, right? Our first women president, President Halimah, has hit the highest office of the country and showed us that that's possible. June Rusdon is someone I serve with in the PPI's board. Very, very capable woman, one of the pioneers of early childhood education. And she grew, I think, her branches to over 140 preschools in her time. So, but what are we trying to say? We're trying to say that success for the Malay women, yes, whilst it fits in some cases a model that we all want to celebrate, the woman who somehow has it all, almost, if I may. The truth is, it is very important to advocate for women's freedom to choose, right? So this is something we've been actively trying to do at PPIS. We've been trying to write more articles, intentionally questioning stereotypes. Is it true that the homemaker is someone who is not contributing to the family? Is it true that she should be considered economically inactive? These are some of the questions we want people to talk about honestly, right? And it does require a whole ecosystem, right? Muiz, for example, had the khutbah, which is the Friday sermon in our mosque, which talks about the Islam's view and the role and status of women in our religion. So what does the future look like? I am still an optimist, right? I believe that we have a lot more that we can shape, that we can define in our own unique way. So there are obviously ongoing efforts, like I said, to shift mindsets, to have more open conversations, and this is obviously one of them. Male allyship is something that I think we really need to, bring into the equation. Oftentimes, IWD or International Women events are full of women, right? Whereas it is so important to get the buy-in of men so that we can build together. Technology and ecosystem of support are powerful enablers. I think AI could be a really game changer. I know you've possibly been hearing this all day long, but it's true, right? The time it takes to help us plan and create something is really just a fraction as what it used to be. And for women who are trying very hard to do so well in so many roles, this could be a game changer. And obviously continue raising awareness for advocating for different versions of success. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Khaira, for the wonderful presentation. I totally agree with you on the male allyship. If you look around you, most of these events that we see for women empowerment, there's a lot of, it's usually attended by women. So I do hope that there's more male allyship. Like myself, I am a male, and I'm here being a moderator. And also because I grew up in a family where my mom is a housewife, and I have three sisters, and my mom has always advocated that you should study as hard together with your sister, because education is something that's very important that can bring you forward towards success. Yeah. So having said that, we will have our second presenter, which is Ms. Shaza Isha, who will do her presentation on women empowerment as well. Before she starts her presentation, I will just give a little brief introduction of who Ms. Shaza Isa is all about. Wait, let me read this. Okay, Shaza Isa has been leading Theatre Ikamatra since 2011, steering the company's artistic vision, strategy, and programming. Committed to the power of storytelling to drive social change, she is dedicated to advancing the ethnic minority art scene in Singapore and beyond. In recognition of her contribution to the arts and heritage sector, she received the inaugural Tunas Harapan Special Mention Award from the Malay Heritage Foundation in 2021. So, without further ado, let us welcome Ms. Shaza to do her presentation.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay, first of all, everybody, I pitched my conversation way too intensely, so oh my God. Okay, so hi everyone, I'm Shaza Isha. I'm the Executive and Artistic Director of Theatre Ikamatra. Theatre Ikamatra is an ethnic minority theatre company, and I've been running it for the last 14 years. Very honored to be with all of you today. To be honest with you, I found this topic really hard to talk about, especially because I understand that I imagine, here to bring an arts and cultural perspective to the conversation, which I will, sort of. But it was hard to tackle this without maybe overthinking it a little bit. I think I did, and we will all navigate this together, my overthinking. Okay, so when you look at the topic, of course, there's a suggestion that there has been change, evolution. There is, of course, the part around evolution of gender roles over time, which is, again, change. There is the Malay part, and there is the women part, as you mentioned, the intersectionality here. I told you I was overthinking it, but what I hope to talk to you about today is a little bit around how Malay women in arts and cultural spaces are navigating the tides of change, their leadership roles, challenges, and their influence, especially drawing from my personal experience. So I don't think it's particularly celebratory. I just wanted to preface that. And then I feel more excited to zoom out and look beyond the arts and look at the conversations that are happening around this topic. So I wanted to first speak to my experience, having been involved with ECA for the last 2 decades. So let's look at the timeline of artistic directors in ECA's history. It's very unique in that most performing arts companies struggle with succession plans, but we hold the record for the most ADs ever. one can see this as an issue, or we can see it as yet another way the company's reason for existence manifests. We are providing opportunities and platforms for ethnic minority artists in a manner that is not centralized. Having said that, it took 20 years and 11 male artistic directors before a woman was put in charge. So, Zizi Azhar in 2009. So why did it take so long? Were there simply no women wanting to be artistic director, or were there no opportunities for them to do so? I don't have an answer, but what I can say is that there are very specific challenges that both Zizi and I faced, which were unique to us, simply because we were women. And again, just to preface that Eka is pretty special in that many people feel that they have a stake in the company, which is true, and that it's the people's company, which is also true. And thus, it's not really shocking for us that we get a lot of people telling us exactly how to do our jobs. But what's maybe shocking, actually not shocking, is that only Zizi and I have been actually told these things. So for example, okay, this is really like personal, but people were and are highly critical, apprehensive, and unsupportive of almost every decision that we make, which I really don't mind, but even when our decisions have reaped rewards, there's still a lot of flack that we get. We've been told very specifically how to do our jobs, what to do, how to do it, why. We're held accountable to everything, as we should be, but no one else has been. And during my time running the company with Farid, who for the record is an incredible man, and I've discussed this with him at length, successes were always seen as his triumphs, and failures were always seen as my shortcomings. So Malay men, especially in the first 15 years or so that I was running the company, saw only Farid as the leader of the company, while I was assumed to be his glorified personal assistant. Despite being the managing director, despite being the only full-time staff, the face of the company and running its day-to-day operations. And we've also been told, for example, right now that the company is too woke, which is too big a topic to talk about today, but there is also that. And how Zizi and my role as artistic directors evolved only during our time to become a lot more about caregiving, which suddenly became an expectation, something that I did not see in the 5 or 6 artistic directors that I had the opportunity to watch in their role. So why am I bringing this up? Is it even appropriate to bring this up here? I bring it up because it's not just my personal experience. I see it in the way people talk about, and I don't think it's unique to Eka either. I think I always see it in how people talk about other performing arts companies, how people talk about things beyond the arts and even beyond professional settings. Yeah. Of course, women in leadership across the arts and culture scene, there are tons of amazing Malay women in the arts and culture scene, all of them making amazing strides and a lot of them pioneers as well. We have Cik Atin Ahmad from Theatre Kami, Som Syed from Sri Warisan, Yuni Hadi at Arts Equator, Asma Alias, Singapore Children's Museum, Shima, Prisma. These are really just a few, okay? Nora, Shafika, Nabila, Hani. We have people like Oni and Julina here as well. This is absolutely not an exhaustive list, I must qualify that. But I want to also ask, it's amazing that these women, all of us, are running the organizations that we do, but do we also have representation on the policy side of things, or spaces where change can also happen? Are there Malay women on the boards or in the top management of National Arts Council, National Heritage Board, MCCY, so on and so forth? Correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there are any, or if you tell me there's 1 or 2, is that enough? Eka's run by women now, that's great. 2 of them are here. But at the same time, so what? I'm not saying that it's not important. I think we're doing our part in harm reduction, but I feel like we need more, and we need to ask for more, and we need to demand for more. And we can talk about that later. I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention that aside from representation, we also tackle this topic in our work, both in deep, meaningful ways or funny, but hopefully thinky kind of ways. So for example, our take on Bawang Putih, Bawang Merah ended up with the Bawang saying no to needing a man to save them. GRC as well as Make Hantu's Great Again had men making multiple sexist jokes, showing how that's normalized in office culture, Malay or otherwise. Our children's show, Mat Champion, discussed how contrived traditional takes on different strengths of boys and girls are. Berat discussed caregiving and its the toll that it takes on women particularly. And Dr. Dini in Potong, in her role as a circumcision specialist, discusses how curious gender specificity is in the workplace. And as women leading these organizations, I think it organically is at the forefront of our decision making. And here I've spoken for myself as well as for Eka, but I'm convinced that women leading these organizations have similar preoccupations. And this is what I would say is the best argument for representation, diversity, inclusion, not only of women, but people of different ethnicities, gender, sexuality, social class, disability, so on and so forth. But on the topic of representation, we need to go way beyond wanting women or ethnic minority women in positions of power, because I feel that power is the problem. Women are fully capable of being good leaders while also doing really bad things. We see people like Kamala Harris, Ursula von der Leyen of the EU supporting a genocide. And yeah, maybe that's too big a conversation for here and for right now, but here in Singapore, we see how women too can impede progress. And I know that this may not necessarily be why I was invited to speak today, but I simply can't talk about women in the arts without talking about women in general. I truly believe that if what we want is genuine equity, we can't be fixated on visible outcomes such as representation. It's important, very, very important, but it's not really the solution. What we need to talk more about is substantive changes which addresses systemic inequalities and introduces structural changes. I have a very fresh example of how representation can mean nothing. We can look at what Senior Minister of State for Foreign Affairs and National Development, Sim An, who is the chair of PAP's Women's Wing, we can see what she said in an International Women's Day interview. Textbook feminism is adversarial, creates divisions between sexes. We go for buy-in, not run-ins, again perpetuating the myth that feminism is adversarial. In the local context, she says, women do not wake up daily to contemplate the one thing I must do today to dismantle the patriarchy. She clearly does not know all of us. Allowing eligible young couples to apply for housing board flats helps women learn to run their own households from a young age, which I think you touched on a little bit earlier. Again, maybe if you want to, but that's not all, right? And how the PAP Women's Wing will focus on early stages of dating, marriage, parenthood, helping to plan community activities, welcome newcomers, and interact with constituents, as if women should only be preoccupied with just getting married, having children, and hosting. And if that's what you want to do it. But to assume that that's the sole role of women in society, therein lies the issue. I feel like it reinforces traditional gender expectations rather than challenging them. I feel like it assumes that feminism should be palatable, non-confrontational rather than transformative. And I feel like it frames gender equity as personal rather than structural, which is what we've been sold about racism as well, amongst other issues. What's missing in the conversation, not just from what Sim An was talking about, but also what I'm thinking about right now in terms of the topic, is the motherhood penalty, such as career stagnation, lower pay after having children, limited workplace flexibility or lack of support structures for working mothers, cultural and societal expectations that caregiving is the sole responsibility of the woman, women having to prioritize caregiving over career aspirations, fathers not being scrutinized as much as mothers are for their parental responsibilities, and policies that claim to support working mothers often reinforcing their role as primary caregivers rather than truly redistributing responsibility. And I just want to really say that these aren't theoretical arguments. These are the everyday complaints of 4 to 5 of my girl group chats on a day-to-day basis. This is something people are facing, actually facing. It's not simply a progressive talking point, it's real. Even in the topic today, we see intersectionality. We're talking about women, we're talking about Malay women, there are layers to the struggle. last year, I wrote my thesis on racism faced by ethnic minority women in Singaporean workplaces. My sample size was small. It was about 21 ethnic minority women, but the stories were shocking. These are patterns, right? But it's a lot more. I bring this up because I feel like the concept of representation and leadership has allowed us to sweep under the rug all the issues everyday women are facing. What more when we bring class into it? And here I want to talk about sort of class, I guess. Care work, social reproductive work. We've gathered here today to reflect on the promises or the advancements on the evolution of gender roles, the narratives of empowerment. But I also hope for us to contemplate the uncomfortable truths that lie beneath the surface of gender progress. The dream of feminism is one of equality, of justice, of collective liberation. But in our contemporary moment, we must ask, who is truly empowered and at whose expense? I wrote a bit of an essay here, so I'm going to read it as Malay Heritage Centre contemplates their decision to invite me here today. I want us to consider the image of the modern successful woman. We're breaking glass ceilings, we're climbing corporate ladders, we're balancing work and family. She's celebrated as the pinnacle of feminist achievement. Yet behind her, invisible hands sustain her world. The domestic workers, the caregivers, often migrant women from our neighboring countries, performing the labor that allows their employers to thrive. Their sacrifices, their long hours, their underpaid and undervalued work form the very foundation of the feminism we are proudly championing. This is not empowerment for all. It is empowerment for some at the cost of others. Again, very recently, I came across a podcast very popular amongst Malay women discussing domestic helpers. At the moment, it's one of the most popular podcasts in Singapore, and I wanted to show you the video, but it's 4 minutes long, so I'm going to give you the TLDR. So the conversation was, would you rather choose a butch maid or a sexy maid? They went into detail, sexualizing domestic helpers and their bodies and sensuality. They joked about domestic helpers seducing their husbands. They joked about their domestic helpers seducing them. They joked about domestic helpers seducing Bangladeshi migrant workers. And they talked about choosing domestic helpers based on looks and body and sensuality through a catalogue with special orders. And this podcast was sponsored by a maid agency. That's wild. Why does this matter? This podcast is popular. Nobody in the comments were calling them out. Is this what our community is thinking about in terms of domestic help? When so many professional women rely on domestic helpers to manage household duties while pursuing their careers, the lack of rights and protections for domestic helpers exposes deep-rooted inequalities in how we value care work. And instead of pushing for broader systemic change, many privileged women accept and perpetuate these structures. So I feel like we must ask ourselves, what does liberation mean when it is conditional, when one woman's success is only possible through the subjugation of another? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the hiring of domestic workers is inherently wrong. It's a job, it's a noble one. But what's problematic is when feminist discourse is repurposed to justify exploitative labor conditions. And we're also not discussing the fact that it's not that we've achieved more gender equality between men and women. I feel like men are still not doing enough or more of care work or social reproductive labor. We've simply given that work to another woman and paying her very little for it and treating her terribly at that. All this to say that we must abandon the myth of individualistic success and return to the roots of feminism, collective struggle. Liberation must be mutual, it must be shared, it must be inclusive. We cannot celebrate the rise of women leaders. We can, but we can't ignore the women cleaning their homes and offices and making this happen. We cannot claim victory when one woman's freedom is contingent upon another's invisibility. If evolution of gender roles is to mean anything, it must be for all women, not just those privileged enough to rise, but those whose labor keeps the world running. The evolution of gender roles among professional Malay women is still unfolding. We're still figuring it out. And I would love for us to celebrate progress, but we must also recognize the limitations of that progress. The arts and cultural scene provides a powerful space for resistance, for storytelling and reimagination. But real change requires systemic shifts in both policy and societal attitudes. And as we move forward, let's ensure that our conversations, our feminism is one that uplifts all women, not just those who fit within traditional or elite frameworks of success. Thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Shaza, that was a very inspiring talk. I am really in awe at all the things that you have presented. Because for me, when I was working in the industry, all my supervisors happened to be females. And then when I started studying, all my TC supervisors are males. So I don't know whether there is any connection within that. So I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to our speakers, Ms. Haira and Ms. Shazia Ishak, for sharing their insights and experiences with us. Their stories have given us a deeper understanding on how Malay women are reshaping leadership, creative expression, and community engagement while navigating the balance between tradition and modernity. The roles of Malay women in our community will continue to evolve, and it's through ongoing dialogue like this, collaboration and support that real progress do happen. So thank you all for being part of the session and for contributing to this meaningful exchange. I hope today's discussion sparks further conversations and inspires actions in your own space. So once again, I would like to thank our participants for attending to this discussion.